Okay, now the mechanics, right? So you have your narrative, your positioning statement, and you know what the brochure needs to say in principle. But now let's actually write the bullet points, right? So I've sat with hundreds of people through this part, and almost every single person asks some version of, am I doing this right? So I will tell you up front, your first draft is probably going to feel either too braggy or not impressive enough. So just get that out of the way. That's normal. Write it anyway, and then we'll fix it. Okay? So here's how a career chapter should be structured in most resumes, right? The first bullet is a role description. Sometimes you do need to include a company description if it's not super well known, right? But basically something super brief just to set the stage. So it's almost like an establishing shot in a TV show. So essentially, what were you responsible for and at what scale? One line. Then you move immediately into some stories, power story bullets, right? So you already have distilled these. Now we're formatting them to the page. And the formula for this is pretty straightforward, right? It's used X skill to drive Y result, leading to this impact. Not necessarily in this order. You want to change it up. So let me show you what this looks like in practice. So here's kind of a generic version that is probably a baseline. This is a representative of a baseline that I see most people coming in with. Something like this, right? I managed a cross-functional team to deliver a project on time and under budget. Now, there's nothing like inherently wrong with this, right? It's not false. It's okay. But the problem with it is that almost anybody in any kind of project leadership position could write that sentence, right? All it tells me is that you had a team, you hit a deadline, and that's kind of like everyone's job, right? So that doesn't actually tell me anything about you. So let's add some stuff into it. Like, watch what happens when we add specificity, right? So the situation was I inherited a stalled product launch with 3 competing teams who hadn't agreed on a scope in months. I rebuilt the project plan from scratch, got alignment in 2 weeks, and shipped on time the first on-time launch in that division for the year, right? So let's imagine for a moment that these 2 things are describing the same person in the same project. But now I know that you walk into messes and fix them, right? The key point I want to illustrate here is that this is like one bullet is just sort of this bland statement that almost everybody could make. And the other is a bullet that I would want to ask about in an interview, right? There's a story in there. You can tell there's a tension of a situation that was broken, and then you came in and you made it better. And remember, your resume's job is not necessarily to tell the whole story. It is to spark enough curiosity that somebody wants to talk to you and it triggers an interview, right? Here's another example. I improved client satisfaction and retention. Oh, okay, right? It's fine. But again, almost anybody could say that. Versus something like shepherded the entire order process from sale through fulfillment, proactively flagged logistical issues before they reached the client, which cut delivery delays by half, turned a churning account into a 3-year renewal, right? So if you have numbers to go with a story, great. But also notice that even if we don't have all of the shiny KPIs to show off, we don't actually need a huge number here because the story's specificity does the work to demonstrate things, right? Like being able to shepherd something end to end, being able to flag things in advance, being able to convert a client at risk into a lucrative renewal. So let's shift gears here to highlight a few common things that I see going wrong in these so we know what to fix and what you have to steer clear of, essentially. So first, and most commonly, is making a list of duties and responsibilities instead of stories about impact, right? So saying something like, I was responsible for XYZ, that's a job description. The role description bullet already covers that. The story bullets are where you show your differentiation, right? How you personally do it. The second mistake here is being vague in the places that matter, right? Like improved efficiency. Okay, well, what kind of efficiency? For whom? Like, how did you improve things? By how much, right? So going from something like improved efficiency to I redesigned the intake process for new client onboarding, which cut turnaround time from 3 weeks to 4 days. Great. Now I can actually see that. Now I can actually make a picture of you doing that. And I can make an evaluation now of whether that actually means anything to me versus I improved efficiency, which doesn't actually say much of anything. Another category of this is front-loading your bullet with so much meaningless jargon. Like, that's a great way to get people's eyes to glaze over, right? So something like leverage cross-functional synergies to optimize stakeholder engagement across the enterprise. That's a lot of words to say a lot of nothing, right? Because we have no idea what you actually did. So the antidote to this one is write it in a way that you tell a friend over dinner, right? So in general, you want to avoid the kind of corporate buzzword lingo word soup that would fall under the same bucket as like, let's circle back and double click into this next action item or you know, something like that, right? Like I almost just vomited in my mouth, right? So avoid that. Use plain English to be clear as opposed to being clever. But on the other hand, we do want to make sure that you are using technical domain-specific language to demonstrate fluency in your particular industry, right? So in short, avoid corporate buzzwords, but do include industry-specific terms. One other pitfall is actually a double-edged sword, and it's metrics and KPIs, key performance indicators. So an obvious risk that you're probably aware of is not including enough, right? Like, so I think it's generally common knowledge that you should include numbers and facts and figures as specifics to help build the story and give a sense of scale and impact of, like, I did something. But there's also the risk of using too many figures to the point where the story actually gets lost and the reader loses a sense of what they should focus on. There's also a risk of choosing the wrong figures that don't actually add up. They don't actually support your story, but they're just facts, right? So here's a rule of thumb. Use KPIs and numbers when they clarify impact and scale. So something like, I grew revenue 38% year over year, that's useful, right? I managed a $50 million budget, right? That tells me the scale. I attended 47 meetings, probably less impactful, right? So not everybody has numbers though, right? If you don't have hard numbers, that's fine. Maybe it doesn't make sense for your position. Maybe it's maybe something hasn't launched yet, so you don't actually have any numbers to share. You can still build out a sense of scale and impact without numbers, right? So for example, if you built the company's first customer success team from scratch, right? If you hired and trained a team of 4, right? There's a number. And you created the playbook that's still in use, 3 years later, the point isn't necessarily like, even if this is something that you did yesterday and we haven't had the time yet to build out what actually happens downstream from that. The point is that you're telling a vivid story, and a vivid story is going to be a generic number every single time. Now, let's talk about a problem that doesn't necessarily show up on the page, but in how you feel writing it. And it's basically feeling like you're bragging too much, right? And it's not so much a problem on getting it on the page as it like how it feels. And if it prevents you from getting it on the page, then it does become a problem, right? So how this looks is you'll write something and then you'll feel like it's too much. And then you'll have this instinct to water it down until it sounds like nothing. So let me tell you now, like, don't do that. What you should do is, instead of bragging, you should simply tell the truth, right? Tell the truth with great detail. Let the specifics do the heavy lifting for you, right? So saying something obnoxious like, I single-handedly saved the company, yeah, that's braggy, right? But instead, if you said something that was just simply true, right? Like, I identified a recurring billing error that had gone unnoticed for 6 months, and then built a case for the fix and recovered $340,000 in lost revenue, that's just what happened, right? And the specifics are what give you credibility. So you don't even need adjectives of like, I was so smart and I was so detail-oriented or whatever, right? The details are there so that it is really the only available conclusion to somebody reading that. Finally, the biggest and probably the sneakiest trap in resume writing is optimizing for sounding impressive, and in the process, forgetting that we need to also be optimizing for your own satisfaction, right? So the best solution for this is to only include stories and dynamics that you actually want to replicate in your next chapter, right? So this is that 3-pillar overlap that I mentioned to you before, right? We need to make sure that we are writing to the overlap where we're talking about skills and stories that meet your care card. So a simple test for this is to check every bullet, right? And ask yourself, if an interviewer asked me to talk more about this, if they pointed at this and say, what was this about? Can you tell me more? Would you light up? Would you be excited to tell that story? If yes, keep the line. If no, then swap it for another story where you do want to talk about it. Okay, so I know I've given you a lot here. Time to get writing. My encouragement to you here is write messy and then come back with fresh eyes and share your drafts, and then we'll get to revising together.